Good afternoon, everyone. Request our honorable guests to be seated. Honorable guests, distinguished experts, CDRI fellows and friends, good afternoon to all as I welcome you back from the break to the very final session of ICDRI, the closing plenary. The theme of the session is the way forward, collective action for infrastructure resilience. This plenary will highlight the opportunities to move from ideas towards mobilizing public and private investment for climate and disaster-resilient infrastructure. In essence, it is a call to action to deliver on enhanced investments for resilient infrastructure. At the very outset, it is my great pleasure to introduce Mr. Damien Syed here. Mr. Syed is the Deputy Head of Mission at the French Embassy in India. He brings extensive diplomatic experience spanning various regions and roles. His career, with a focus on international relations and cooperation, includes high-level assignments in Malaysia and Kolkata. May I now request Mr. Syed to present his opening remarks.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, dear friends, very good afternoon. Thank you for the invitation to the closing plenary of the ICDRI. It was again a very rich and insightful edition, so I'm confident it will help us trigger new concrete actions in favor of resilient infrastructure in the Indo-Pacific. I would recommend to gather in a short roadmap the recommendations that emerged during this two-day conference in order to facilitate the follow-up and to prepare for the next edition. So France is delighted. My government is very glad to take the co-chair of CDRI for the next 2 years. We look forward to working closely with the Secretariat and with all of you in the next 2 years. France already takes an active part in the international infrastructure community. I could mention through the G20 working group on infrastructure, which has made infrastructure resilience one of its priorities. I could mention also the G7 working group implementing the Global Partnership for Infrastructure and Investment, PGII, the OECD, and the EU, the European Union, through the implementation of the Global Gateway Initiative. We also support various existing organizations and initiatives aiming to reduce the threats of disasters, such as UNDRR and the Climate Risk and Early Warnings Initiative, the CRUISE Initiative. We deeply believe that CDRI has a very meaningful place to take in this resilient infrastructure community, and we believe CDRI can bring value to these international efforts I just mentioned. We believe in particular that the CDRI has a unique role to play in the promotion of the highest standards in infrastructure quality in the Indo-Pacific, integrating the G20 principles of investment in quality infrastructure, QII, to integrate it in the CDRI's normative framework. It would add great value to its action and ambition. There are other concrete tools to enhance investment in infrastructure resilience, such as fast infra, platform and Source platform, dealing with both private and public sector investments. This leads me to 3 priorities for France as the new CDRI co-chair, which I would like to share with you. First, successful scaling up of CDRI's international impact while remaining an agile organization. Second, delivery on CDRI strategic work plan through the scaling up of projects and technical assistance to its members. And third, promotion of ambitious infrastructure quality principles and standards, G20 QII, to unlock investment in infrastructure resilience. So I look forward to hearing the remarks of my colleagues and the panelists in the upcoming session. And again, I want to reiterate our joy on the French side to take the co-chair of CDRI. We look forward to working closely with the Secretariat and all of you. So I will stop here, and again, I wish you a fruitful last part of the ICDRI. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much for those words, sir. I would now like to invite our moderator and panelists of the session to the stage. Please come and join me here. Moderating this session is Ms. Jayashree Nandi. Jayashree is a renowned environmental journalist recognized for her excellence in climate science reporting. Her accolades include the Ramnath Goenka Excellence in Journalism Award in the Science and Technology category for 2021 and the Center for Media Studies Young Environment Journalist of the Year Award in 2019. She also won the Merit Award for Sustained Reporting on Environment at the 4th Asian Environmental Journalism Awards in 2015. It is my pleasure to now hand over the conduct of the session to Jayashree. We look forward to the valuable insights that will unfold under your guidance. Thank you.
Hello. Yeah, you can hear me? So I have a very difficult task at hand because you've already had 1.5 days full of conference discussions. But I want to keep this as an important session, as a session that we remember, and we also take forward the actions we discuss here. So before we start, I would just like to give a reporter's perspective to you all on what it means to cover climate change and what it means to cover disasters. It's an area that we are covering very, very actively, but I would just like to give you what our daily lives are like. So for the past 3 to 4 days, the only stories that I have been filing are related to climate disasters. On Sunday, we interviewed climate scientist Dr. Friederike Otto, who demolished the speculation about cloud seeding amplifying Dubai's rainfall. Climate crisis, she said, had supercharged the rainfall activity due to a large weather system over the region. So much so that a modern world-class city like Dubai was thrown out of gear for at least a day. On Monday, we covered the ISRO analysis of long-term satellite imagery covering the Indian Himalayan region, which revealed that around 601 glacial lakes have expanded more than twice in size since 1984. 10 lakes have grown between 1.5 to 2 times, and 65 glacial lakes at 1.5 times since 1984. Imagine how will it impact the downstream communities if these lakes were to burst in Gulf episodes in the coming years? On Tuesday, we covered World Meteorological Organization's Asia report, which said Asia was the world's most disaster-hit region from weather, climate, and water-related hazards in 2023. It also highlighted that extreme heat, severe floods, a Gulf episode devastated parts of India last year. In India, severe heat waves in April and June last year killed about 110 people. On Sunday, and this is something we cover regularly, on Sunday, parts of East India, especially Gangetic West Bengal and Orissa, have recorded heat wave to severe heat wave conditions at a stretch for a week now in April, with day temperatures exceeding 40 degrees in several places, but also warm night conditions and 50 to 75% humidity during afternoon hours, creating a deadly mix of extremely hot, humid days and nights. There is no respite. The peak heat in summer is normally recorded in May and June, so this is only the beginning. From my experience of reporting from the ground, I can say that these weather extremes have greatly reduced the productivity of the most vulnerable. They are at the mercy of the elements. In rural Balia, I saw several homes did not have basics met, not even a ceiling fan in killing heat. In Rayalaseema, people do not have drinking water, forget about water for other needs. They have become vulnerable to both extreme floods in monsoon and drought during other months. And I really hope and wonder if organizations, intergovernmental agencies, and a space like ICDRI will be coming up with specific codes and siting guidelines for the Himalayan region soon. People are really desperate at the moment, so these interventions have to be made soon and at scale. That brings me to our topic for the closing plenary. Who will fund these interventions and how and by when? The estimates of the annual investment required to address infrastructure deficits, progress on the SDGs and achieve net zero by 2050 amount to 9.2 trillion, out of which 2.76 trillion must be invested in low and middle income countries. The current adaptation financing gap in developing countries is estimated to be between 194 billion USD per year to 366 billion. This underlines the need for increasing climate adaptation financing, especially with the participation of the private sector. And, now I'm going to introduce the esteemed panel, and I feel very, very honored that I have the opportunity to moderate this session. But I would like everybody to be, to be candid, to be as open as possible so that we have a fruitful and active discussion. So let me introduce the panel. Mr. Shombi Sharp, UN Resident Coordinator in India. Welcome, sir. Dr. Janice Rogers, Chief Operating Officer, Geohazards International. Ms. Carla Montesi, Director, Green Deal and the Digital Agenda, INTPA, European Commission. She'll be joining us online. Dr. Kit Miyamoto, CEO, Miyamoto International. And Ms. Mio Oka, Country Director for India Asian Development Bank. Okay. So let's start. Ms. Carla Montesi has to leave early, so let's begin with her. She's the Director, Green Deal and the Digital Agenda, INTPA, European Commission. And hi, ma'am. Good evening. EU has been very forthcoming on many issues in the climate negotiations. And from my experience of covering the negotiations, I have seen that they are willing to engage and are very forthcoming. How is EU planning to invest in disaster-resilient infrastructure? And how can climate finance flow to these projects? Thank you.
Many thanks, Jashi, and good afternoon to you all. Let me first start thanking the organizer, the Coalition for Disaster Resilience Infrastructure, for the invitation to participate in your panel. I'm very sorry to be just in a virtual world. On the question that you mentioned, our approach, the approach that we take at the European Union level towards investment in disaster risk, it's a multidimensional one. You have already mentioned the Green Deal. Green Deal that was adopted in 2019. It's our European strategic growth strategy in Europe to reach climate neutrality and become climate resilient by 2015. Adaptation, disaster risk investment are completely part of our strategy of the Green Deal. And just 1 year later, the adoption of the Green Deal, we have adopted what we call the climate change adaptation strategy, with the obligation for us, for the European Union, to mainstream climate financial commitment in all our budget for Europe, but also the budget for our work, our partnership with partners around the world. Just, I want to take this opportunity to underline that the European Union is, in any case, the world's biggest climate finance contributor. Our contribution will go for half to mitigation and half for adaptation. And we use all our instruments on climate finance to support also adaptation. And I would say starting for just grants for capacity building, to deepen the knowledge, to preparedness, but also with the Global Gateway towards investment. Global Gateway is our strategy for the work of our partnership with partner countries, with which 300 billion investment with member states, in which we want to use to increase, to boost investment in infrastructure, boost investment in infrastructure in order to ensure that this infrastructure could be most sustainable, resilient, and to do all this, we are putting in place some financial instrument just to de-risk investment. So it's a combination of grants, concessional loans, guarantee, blended finance that we are using just to leverage investment and to de-risk investment for the private sector. Because it's obvious that just with the public finance will never be able to take and to solve the problem of climate change that we have in front of us. So our clear position is to continue to intervene with public finance, but also facilitate the intervention of the private sector finance. Now, of course, I can give to you many examples. Just let me mention that in Philippines, for example, we have a technical assistance program that is supporting a policy-based loan for disaster risk reduction at the local level. We are a joint force with the French Development Agency, AFD, for a total of 405 million, including grants, just to help to implement the National Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Plan. One other example, it's the example that we are using in Tanzania, where cities are at the core of resilience. So with our contribution, we are putting pressure on for a program on green and smart cities. Once again, a Team Europe intervention, just to stimulate investment loans from partners for sustainable, inclusive urban development for the benefit of local communities. Last elements that I would like to mention is, of course, the climate change adaptation and the resilience in Africa, an investment package with our Team Europe for 1 billion that we have announced the last year at the COP, that is fully dedicated to support risk data and information, strengthening governance, once again mobilizing investment and promoting disaster risk finance. One of the key sides of our work is, of course, work to fostering a regulatory support in the countries, because we need to ensure that the support to investment, the resilience is fit for purpose. So that's implied that in the context, in the country where we are working, we have also a regulatory support that will facilitate the risk. But of course, countries also need to support in making informed decision about risk financing, and that this as well help in actually accessing risk finance. Um, Let me just mention one initiative that it's very, very important that we have over the years contributed with 24 million to the African Risk Capacity Instrument. That is the instrument that advise governments on suitable financing instrument and insurance for their risk profile, such as parametric insurance. We are clearly seeing the value of this instrument to respond to the current drought situation, for example, in Southern Africa. We are contributing also to the big initiative that we call it the Global Shield Against Climate Risk. That was the initiative that was launched at the last COP, to which we contribute for 30 million euro. Last element that I would like to mention is our investment in technology, and notably in developing of the Earth observation tools.
Sure.
Also support better risk management, especially towards Copernicus. You know that Copernicus is our Earth observation system in the European Space Program. It's the program that collect and provide free data in view of early warning system and informed decision, including resilience infrastructure. We are working in order to give access to the Copernicus services to many countries around the three continents. So this is maybe I was too
Sure.
long, but just to
No.
give some concrete example of this multiple sectoral approach that we have in the matter. And many, many thanks for
Thank you so
having
much.
this important discussion.
That was very useful. Um, yeah, so EU has various initiatives, but then one of the main issues facing disaster recovery and building of disaster resilient infrastructure is finance, and we see this as a stumbling block every time in climate negotiations, in other forums, that finance seems to be that one sticking point and it stops all discussion beyond that. How do you think cooperation and collaboration can be fostered to address this trust deficit issue?
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jayashree, and mujhe yahan bulane ke liye dhanyavad. Great pleasure to be here joining this esteemed panel on behalf of the UN system here in India and as representative of the Secretary General. I think, just obviously, it's every time we open the newspaper, you were talking about the news, right? It's so depressing. We just see wars, conflicts everywhere. We see the hottest year maybe in 100,000 years. We see floods. We see all of this. And the cruel irony is that it's precisely those countries who have contributed the least, certainly at least to climate change, that are paying the highest prices, that are now something like 50 of the most climate vulnerable countries are what the Secretary General calls on debt row. So, facing debt crises, having to choose between putting food on the plates versus paying, debt interest. And at the same time, the systems we have exactly to deal with these mechanisms are buckling under the strain of geopolitical divisions, of just, lacking in reform. As the Secretary General says, we can't, expect institutions designed for our grandparents to deliver a future for our grandchildren. This is the challenge. That's why I think here in India, I can't think of a better place to be and a more important moment than to be in India, in Delhi at this point in time. Because you have countries like India emerging with new solutions, with new momentum. And we saw what India delivered at the G20. Really, really important and very much aligned with calls of the Secretary General for an SDG stimulus plan. Prime Minister Modi said yesterday, I understood here on the video, talking about how nature, how disasters, pandemics, these things don't respect borders, right? So no country is resilient until all countries are resilient. Now, in terms of the financing, yes, what we've seen is since 2015, this SDG financing gap has actually increased from 2.5 something to 4 trillion a year. Why? Well, the big part of that is the need for climate action. And something that over half now of that financing gap is related to climate action. The cost of climate financing is increasing considerably because the costs of climate inaction are growing and because the incidents are increasing, the severity and the frequency of these events. So what to do? There has been a lot of momentum towards new innovative approaches, blended financing, efforts to de-risk, to bring in private capital markets. in this last sort of halfway to 2030. Certain regions, Latin America, for example, have been able to really deepen their financial markets to bring in a significant amount of capital. But this has been nowhere close enough. And we see that in certain, especially lower income countries, in SIDS, these kinds of situations, we have to consider that the private markets are just simply not going to be enough. Even if there's $113 trillion in global financial markets, we need a step change in the way that we're approaching this. And so you see that efforts are being made, the spring meetings, the Bretton Woods, IMF, World Bank, they've been looking at reforms, Indian origin, I mean, Ajay Banga is there in the front as well. But as India put forward in the G20, the Singh Summers report, and as the Secretary General has called for, we need at least $500 billion a year in public financing to help unlock those trillions, 4 times the amount that we currently have in adaptation, mitigation, and resilient spending. And as the Secretary General says, why CDRI is so critically important is that I think the world has changed in the past few years. I would say between COP26 and COP27. We now know that we have to spend as much, if not more, on adaptation as we do mitigation, because this is impacting people now every single day. And it's about ultimately the right to development, and it's about ensuring that frankly, the high-income world, the developed world, does the heavy lifting to work with the developing world, providing financing, providing technology transfers, working together in these kind of extraordinary times of geopolitical division, which is really, really tough. And so again, that's why I want to just reiterate how important it is, the leadership that India has been showing and the increased voice of the Global South in this global conversation.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mr. Sharp. In fact, that completely leads to what I wanted to ask Dr. Janice Rogers. The threshold to adapt or to respond to certain extreme events is crossing for many communities. I mean, they do not have the time to wait for mitigation to, solve their problems. They want immediate measures to adapt to the new normals. What will be the most critical infrastructure projects in the coming few years to help adapt to climate change, especially in settings like, Global South, in India, and in surrounding areas, if you could say?
Thank you. Well, the most important infrastructure for climate change adaptation is the infrastructure that has not been built yet, has not been designed yet, has not been financed yet. This is the infrastructure of the future that can be more resilient. We have a tremendous opportunity to leverage the infrastructure construction that's coming. The estimates from CDRI's annual report are that we need something like $9 trillion by 2050 in infrastructure investment. So that's one aspect. Also, when we replace infrastructure that's destroyed by disasters, by extreme weather, that is an opportunity to not just put back what was there, but to also to build what should be there. And coming from the civil society perspective, I'd like to highlight a few things. Within that, obviously, we need to build the bigger systems that serve people over time, but that takes time, and you're asking about the short term. The first is asking what supports people, what matters most to them in their daily life. What are the systems that they really need at that local level? That could be lifeline infrastructure at the local level, things like water and power, and looking more at decentralized systems at the household level, things like solar, rooftop solar, rainwater harvesting, things that are short, that have a short time frame, so the households are more resilient to those shocks, to those extreme weather events. Also, green infrastructure, so nature-based solutions, things like planting mangroves to help protect from coastal erosion, and have co-benefits to communities as well. So thank you. I'm just honored to be a part of all of this. And I hope that all the infrastructure that you all are a part of, developing, planning, financing, and building, can contribute to the infrastructure we need in the future. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you so much, Dr. Rogers. But like you said, that decentralized infrastructure, I wanted to ask this to Mr. Miyamoto. What kind of infrastructure is actually disaster resilient? We hear a lot about these terms, but we do not understand what is disaster resilient infrastructure. What are some of the innovations that are happening in this sector, and who is funding them?
Okay. Well, first of all, as a private sector representation in this panel, I'm really honored to be here. And so our company, Miyamoto International, is funded by the USAID for past 2.5 years. That is the CDRI movement. And I might just have to say compared to 2.5 years ago, we have this similar kind of conference. We had probably 100 engineers in a basement in some hotel, okay? But today, what we have here is just night and day. Just incredible how this energy and the momentum is. It's a lot to do with the leadership of the DG Amit and also Mr. Kamel. It's just incredible. It's unbelievable, you know. So now we have this incredible momentum. I think we're going to keep going, and that's just fantastic. And this is extremely critical. Now, so answer your question, I want to talk about example what happened in Turkey last year. So February last year, there's magnitude 7.8 and 7.6 hit back to back, 2 hours apart. It's a huge earthquake, affected the about 500 kilometers long, 200 kilometers wide over the southern part of Turkey, right at the Syrian border. It's a mountainous area, and it's about 14 million people affected. And we counted about 1.4 to 1.7 million buildings. And many of the buildings consist of mid-rise, the reinforced concrete, the apartment buildings, okay? And the results is, so you see that Turkey has been investing disaster risk reduction for some 20 years now, maybe longer actually, since the earthquake they had in 1999. And we actually assist the Turkish Istanbul government to set up this program for disaster risk reduction back in 2000, I think 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And it was called ISMAP program. It was considered to be one of the most successful World Bank finance program. And World Bank first financed about, I think, like $300 million, and eventually they got financed by the Islamic Bank and others up to almost $2 billion. And they create the guidelines for seismic strengthening of schools, hospitals, public buildings. Okay, that involved a lot of trainings of the engineers and contractors and all that in Istanbul because they are preparing for Istanbul earthquake. However, this earthquake happened on the southern border, right? Instantaneously killed about 50,000 people, because about 35,000 buildings are collapsed right at the moment and damaged heavily about 100,000 buildings. And about almost 500,000 buildings are damaged in a certain degree. So that's a huge disaster out there. So questions of what happened? What went right and what went wrong after investing billions of dollars for DRR? So first, what went right? The response structure, the emergency response done by the Turkish government is something I have never seen anything like that. It's hugely robust because they are prepared for the Istanbul earthquake, which is a town of 20 million people, right? Yeah. So I got there about 48 hours, about 2 days after. Pretty much every single roads and bridges are completely open, accessible, everyone, the whole epicenter area. It's pretty amazing, actually. And they had about 50 to like 100,000 the emergency response personnel was on the ground, pretty much every village and towns and cities. And they activated almost 100 search and rescue teams, many internationally. They're put into every place, everywhere. Just amazing. And I think this is probably the first time the urban search and rescue team impact tremendously. I know they saved like 1,000 people or something like that, maybe more actually. So it was amazing. And they assessed the almost all the damaged buildings within about 3 weeks' time. You're talking about the 500,000 building stocks there. Well, they have access to these thousands of engineers deployed right at the moment, and they actually put a QR code at each of a building. Not only talking about damage index, but repairability and so on. So it was just incredible technology they used. And airports open, even Hatay, that's one of the most destructive area in the whole area. It's open within 4 days' time. So response structures are fantastic. They got 50,000 tents deployed, just probably one of the best I've ever seen. So that's good news because they're prepared for it, right? So resiliency is not only hardening in infrastructure, the response piece of it. Governmental response is a very, very critical piece of it. Because resiliency not only count by the how much damage or not damaged, but also how fast it can be recovered. So the response time is sure that it would be better. It's much faster recovery components. So that's actually a very important part of it. So response piece, I think they did just a great job. Now, but what went wrong is the commercial buildings. So Turkey now has probably one of the best building codes out there, and also probably one of the best earthquake structural engineers in the world, actually, in Turkey. However, all the buildings collapsed. Many are privately owned apartment buildings, right? It's not required to have inspection. So all the buildings we assessed like, I don't know, several thousand buildings out there, and we see the collapsed, damaged. And you don't see like a major wrong, per se. Like a little things. For example, you put concrete, you put aggregates, little rocks on the concrete, is humongous thing, supposed to be little, stuff like that. Or how to tie the little reinforcement, where they did it quite not right? Those things can be corrected so easily by the engineers. That didn't happen, So just inspection, that's it. Think about it. It probably at like a 0.1% of the total construction cost. That's missing link. However, public buildings, they perform beautifully. The hospitals, there's about a dozen hospitals in the epicenter area. They not only didn't get damaged, but they're functional after this earthquake. Can you imagine? Magnitude 7.8 and 7.6 functional. The reasons they provide a base isolation. What it is a people building under the roller, essentially. So the ground moves, the building doesn't move. And that technology, it's implemented from the ISMAP program. So the investment they made for public buildings really worked. Technology is incredible. And schools, many performed very well. And as I said, the viaduct and roads and everything else is fantastic. So public infrastructure worked exactly the way it should be, right? But what's missing is apartment buildings. So sure, those things worked, but what is it? What did I say? Like 500, several 100,000 buildings is gone, damaged. So just only good infrastructure left, but no place to live. Yes. Doesn't make sense, right? Yes. But that can be done by the little inspections by the engineers.
Monitoring. Yeah. Great. This is a very insightful example. When we come back for the next round, I'm coming to you. Before that, I just want to, sort of alert you all that I'll be coming back for a second round where I'm going to ask you what is the most important change you would like to see to ensure finance is delivered. But to you, Mr. Miyamoto, I'm going to ask about early warnings. Is that in an ideal situation, we do not want these disasters to, make the damage that they're doing right now. So early warning systems, are they in place? What do we need to do for that? So if you can speak on that. And then there is a lot of conversation now about multilateral bank reforms. And we were looking forward to the World Bank spring meetings. And, we are really excited and hopeful that something is going to come through soon. Ms. Miyaoka, I would like to ask you, how is ADB making more climate finance available for rebuilding and recovery?
Thank you. Very difficult question, and we are struggling with that on a daily basis. So ADB estimated we need about 1.7 trillion per year for infrastructure to maintain its growth momentum, poverty reduction, and respond to climate change. In other words, we need a massive investment. We mobilized about 9.8 billion last year on the climate financing, and of course, that's not good enough. So we need a new and innovative approach that everybody is looking for to accelerate this. So we are in the process of strengthening our role as an enabler and a catalyst to do this. So first, the tapping the potential of private sector is obvious and important. So why the business case for the private sector investment in mitigation, climate mitigation, is very much in place. There is a comparative lack of bankable investment opportunities in climate adaptation, and this is the issue. Investing in climate adaptation may not be commercially viable or self-sustainable. Therefore, it does not attract attention of the private sector, particularly from the private sector. So we try to come up, and we need to come up the way to capture the project benefit other than the economic benefit analysis. So MDB could assist such cost-benefit assessment to identify other costs such as social benefit, environmental benefit that can be taken into account in this economic, when we assess the economic value of the project. And then we can follow to create a framework and then provide a capacity building support to enable this. And second, and everybody is trying to do this, ADB has also been trying to launch a new partnership platform, philanthropic vehicle, blended finance tool, and new forms of transition finance to scale up resilient infrastructure investment. In this relation, we launched an innovative financial platform such as ASEAN, Catalytic Green Finance and Green Recovery Platform to capture climate financing. Now, we are working with Green Climate Fund to establish a trust fund that can capture financing from philanthropies, private sector, and public sector, and so that we can finance some of the climate adaptation and mitigation project, including the startup. And we can provide that through intermediate financing tool. And this is something we are trying to enlarge within the region. In any case, my conclusion is pretty general, saying development organizations, government, private sector must collectively work better and together. Establish evidence case, business case, enable environment for rapidly scaling up private sector and public sector investment. So, in doing so, closely working with CDRI is also important. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So, to sort of summarize some important thoughts from this round of questions is that the infrastructure for adaptation is yet to be built, and the most vulnerable are suffering the most and also do not have the means to adapt. And private finance for adaptation is difficult to come by. So these are some of the challenges that we are facing. So I would like to ask you, what is the most important change you would like to see to drive investment today for a more resilient tomorrow? And I want this to be very sharp so that we actually, take these notes and go back and work on them.
For me, thank you. So I think for me, it's exactly what CDRI is doing. It's building that sense of urgency on the adaptation side, on the resilience side, because for so long, rightly so, the world was focused on mitigation and the UNFCCC and IPCC and this sort of thing. And as the colleague from ADB said, it's much easier to find bankable investments in that space. You've got income streams, this sort of thing. But what I want to say is that, we have to realize that, and this is about right to development, and this is where India's position has been so important, because as long as the right to development and mitigation are sort of somehow put into conflict, or communities or countries have to make a choice, then they're going to go for the right to development. You started off by talking about Dubai. I landed in Dubai 48 hours after that storm. And, I was struck by a couple of things. One was, probably things could have been built in a much better way to minimize impact in the first place. However, it's a once-in-a-century event, 2 years or something of rainfall in one day, which can be anticipated happening more and more and more. But the other was that it was quite remarkable how quickly they recovered. I think within 48 hours already, pretty much everything was normal. Very low loss. I think 5 people passed away or something. Same thing in Miami, which gets hammered by cyclones all the time. You look at India, Orissa, you see examples of amazing resilience there, right? But most of that has been built on, through old-fashioned development, not using clean energy, these sorts of things. And so the developing world, Global South, is demanding the same access to that, resilient infrastructure. But we have to be sure that we do it in the right way. As you mentioned, and I think absolutely brilliant, so much is yet to be built. India, for example, I think the Minister of Urban Affairs says 2/3 of India's cities haven't yet been built. India's adding a new Chicago every 2 years or something like that. It's an unbelievable opportunity, as Amitabh Kant, G20 Sherpa has said, for India to lead by example of how to industrialize in a low-carbon way, and many other countries in the Global South. But really, we need to change still dramatically how we work together. We cannot be talking about cost of capital being high for developing countries. We can't be talking about debt payments multiples higher than high-income countries, what they're paying for the same thing. And I just would simply close on reiterating that the Summit of the Future is an opportunity through the UN system for member states, for communities, for civil society to come together and really make good inputs into the reforms that we need to make sure that our multilateralism, our partnerships are fit for purpose. Thank you.
Thank you so much, very concise. Dr. Rogers, what are your thoughts?
Well, I would love to see a lot of progress on implementation and commitments from governments, from even the municipal level and the very local level to resilient infrastructure. We have to have the political will to do what we need to do, and that's across the board.
Mr. Kit Miyamoto, what I was referring to in early warnings was not really for earthquakes, because I understand it's very difficult to have early warnings for earthquakes.
Early warning system?
Yeah. But generally for climate disasters, what stage are we in terms of early warnings, and how can we improve them? Is that one of the changes that you would like to see in the coming years?
Early warning systems. Well, good. And can be not so good. Depends. Like, for example, tsunami hit in Japan, if you remember 2011, right? And we lost about 17,000 people. But early warning system probably saved like a couple million people there. Okay? Because they had early warning of tsunami coming, and people trained to get away from that in higher grounds. So that little things like that just made a huge impact, saving millions of people. And the early warning system of the hurricane, warnings and so on, like in Haiti. So you don't lose like 1,000 people by the hurricanes anymore there, And so as Bangladesh, you see that, early warning system extremely critical for the weather-related stuff. But once it comes to earthquake, it's, yeah, sure, why not, right? And it kind of works, but if the earthquake happened right beneath you, then you're going to have only reaction time over a couple seconds, so it may not going to help you that much. If you're far away, sure, has a little more chance to do something about it. So it just depends, But so early warning system will save lives per se, but will not save the economy at all. So we got to be kind of careful about that. you know.
And would you like to add what is that one change you would like to see in the coming years so that there is more financing of disaster resilient infrastructure?
What changes we will make to make more finance? Public support. I think that's a really important. So this kind of a conference and use the media, social media, mass media to talk about disaster resilience is the most critical. Japan is probably one of the most advanced places like that. Why is that? Because Japan, we have this huge disaster happens every 5 years. Okay, destroy the cities. Every 5 years we lose them, you know, literally. So people keenly aware of a disaster, keenly aware of what works and what doesn't work. Okay, so what does that mean? So which means the public is aware of it. So there's a political will to do finance and do all kind of stuff. And so is the private sector too. It's really important to understand that public sector cannot do alone. Only the 10 to 15% of public money is spent to do reconstruction. Actually, the rest of it have to be filled by private sector. So private sector has to be part of it. It's very, very important. So how to do that? Really public support, you know? That's actually most critical piece there. Today, if you go to if you ride the subway in downtown Tokyo, you're going to see advertisement by the big developers say, this apartment is base isolated. People pay for it, you know, because they are aware of this base isolation. They are aware of how important this is. So yes, that's why the ICDRI conference is important.
Sure.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. And Ms. Miyoka, what are your thoughts? I mean, there is a lot of concern about indebtedness, debt rising in the global south. And what is that one change, do you think, that would make finance, grant-based finance, available to vulnerable countries?
Sorry, the debt is not so much related to the climate financing. So it's a very difficult question to respond, but just going back what we can do, right, to change the world. So I think each individual's awareness is very important because there is a clear and present danger here. And I was quite shocked by hearing yesterday that ADB's headquarters in Manila hit 44 degrees Celsius in April. It never happened in their history. So, but next year, if that happens again, what is it that people would say? Is it the new normal? No, this is something wrong. So there's something that each individual have to think the cause and how we are connected to provide the solution. So we perhaps may not be able to live the way we lived before, right? And so that's that kind of awareness. My comment here may sound a little naive, but I think each individual has that kind of sense and awareness might be able to change the world. Yeah. Thank you.
Sure. So just some, summary of some of the things that we discussed here. For example, just the idea of living with disasters, like Mr. Kit Miyamoto and Ms. Miyoka said, that the awareness that it can happen anytime and in any place also helps preparedness and being ready. But the fact that most of the infrastructure that is going to help us in adapting to these crises is yet to be built is a huge, huge challenge ahead. And for that, like Mr. Sharp said, that more and more grant-based concessional finance and, finance that is just and easily accessible is what we need. So before we wrap up, I would like to call Mr. Amit Proti, Director General CDRI, for a vote of thanks and also for concluding remarks from the conference. Thank you.
I think you started off by saying, the 1.5 days of discussion, and I'm looking around the room, and I'm curious how many of us are still awake? I got some smiles. A lot of people are awake. So it's never easy to come at the end of 2 days of, really everybody I have met outside who has come up to me has said, I really enjoyed the discussions. I don't think, and maybe you've been polite, which is allowed. Kamal, thank you. I think I have felt the genuine thank you and genuineness from all of you that you have actually learned something, contributed a lot, and met people who you are finding are people who might be colleagues along this journey that we have embarked on. For me, I have certainly learned quite a few things. Some may have been hidden in places, but suddenly somebody said something and triggered a thought. What we are trying to do, the whole discussion that we set out to do at CDRI this time was on finance. And why? Because I think a lot of us are hearing the whole need for adaptation. Finance, private sector needs to come into finance. We need better quality to demonstrate finance will come. We need to build. There are a lot of narratives that have suddenly started bubbling. And at CDRI, we thought, let's take this opportunity to bring together a really, really solid group of experts from members, from our groups of friends to start unpackaging a little bit. Because end of the day, it's about narratives. Right? We're all building narratives. And you started off by saying, tell me what is DRI? And I'm very glad that you asked that question. Because even this year, who is moderating our sessions is not our technical experts. And there's a reason for that. Because we all are very comfortable saying risk this and risk that and disaster this and disaster that, and it's not natural disasters. You cannot use the word natural disaster, but I still open the page, newspaper, and I see it says natural disaster. Why? Because we have a lovely community, but we haven't yet figured out how to get the messages out to the people who will ask for that change, to the board in the Japan Metro saying, this building is got base. Why? Because we have not yet gotten to that point of breaking adaptation down. I think, and that has been the biggest challenge, and that is the journey that I hope all of us continue to embark on. I remember a few years ago, I read a paper of somebody did some research in Surat, and they found that, every time there's a flood, the vendors who, Surat is a city that produces a lot of fabric and textiles. And every time there was a flood, the people whose, factories were in flood-prone areas would just dump all their stuff into a car and drive and park the car in a flyover. And it's got me thinking that private sector is already paying for adaptation. Right? That is actually, all of us are paying for power when our heat bills go up. So this notion that private sector is not paying for adaptation, I think we need to spend some more time unpackaging that, starting to talk to the industries that are already facing the problems of flooding, heat, etc., to say, you're already paying for it. So it's not that, but we haven't yet figured out how to get that narrative into the financing of infrastructure space. And I think we really need to spend a lot more time unpackaging that. 5 things I heard that I'll just, clearly gives us a roadmap of some sort, which is we need better data. End of the day, we do need better data to be able to understand what are the upcoming risks that can then get into decisions on financing. That is clearly one need that exists. The second one is we do need better metrics to quantify resilience and adaptation benefits. Again, it's narrative building, but we also need metrics to measure. The third thing is, this is the moment to start leveraging artificial intelligence and AI. I don't know how many of you have used ChatGPT, but I downloaded it day before yesterday, and I said, okay, give me a 5-minute speech on disaster-resilient infrastructure. And I promise you, it gave me 95% of what I would have actually said. In exactly maybe 10 seconds. And I showed it to my wife, and she's like, hey, wait a minute, I'm going to, So we are actually at that moment that technology may allow us to get to better solutions. It's that moment. And these things happen once in a generation. So I think it's really important, particularly amongst the youngsters, the fellows who may get technology better than somebody like me. I would push you more to see how technology solutions can be brought into the discussions that we are having. The fourth point, I think all of you will just nod, is capacity building. And capacity building at every stage, whether it's data modeling, whether it's the last mile, the mason who didn't anchor the rod together, and that caused a disaster and financial implication. I think we still need a lot of effort to get our capacity building efforts, like if you're going to be building 20 new Bombay's worth of infrastructure, we need people who can build it in the right way. So the capacity building is incredibly important. Communication, I started with the discussion on the role of communication. We do need clearer, better narratives. And then I think the opening plenary, we heard from UN Women. In all of this discussion we've had, even here, we actually didn't touch upon women and the whole role of the importance of understanding that adaptation is actually very local and often affects women a lot more, who may understand how to come up with solutions on the ground. And we do need to understand how to build that whole capacity up. So those are the things that I picked up from this whole 2 days. I'm sure there's a lot more. And all of you, we're going to be sending you a survey on Monday. We want you to get home. I do hope that you put in some of your thoughts in there, because we want to capture some of your learnings as well. I'm just about to close, but before I close, I think I can't be standing here and closing ICDRI without acknowledging at least one person, and that's Kamal Kishore. Kamal, no, I know you don't want it. You're a very humble person, but you've been instrumental as to where we are today. So, thank you from my heart, but I think from everybody. I'm seeing the smiles. I think let's have a round of applause for Kamal. I want to thank the panel. Thank you so much for, again, not easy at the last panel to bring energy, but you brought it. I really, really appreciate it. With that, I want to thank everybody in the room, but I'm going to say it in muchas gracias to my Spanish friends. Dhanyavad to the people who speak Hindi. I have to read this one because I don't know this very well, which is Fafetai. This is these friends from Samoa. Merci beaucoup. I think France has taken over. I have to acknowledge that. Obrigado. And thank you very much for all of you for being here.
Check. Friends, after such heartfelt remarks, nothing scripted from me, I would just invite Mr. Damin Syed also on stage so that we can capture this moment in a photograph.